Hello everyone, welcome to my messy studio. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist, an art professor, and a fountain pen addict that uses them for making art. In this video, we're going to review this extremely substantial pocket pen made by Gravitas Pens, featuring a titanium semi-flex nib. We're going to look at this pen very closely, take it through my usual series of tests, draw with it extensively, and determine whether this is a good option for those of us that enjoy using fountain pens for drawing. Let's get started. I have to admit that I have an oversized love for the pocket pen and have amassed more than a pocket full of them over the years. And I'm not entirely sure that my love of them is entirely practical. Yes, they're more portable than a full-size pen, but often not much more so. And more often than not, I end up carrying my pens inside a bag anyway. But that's usually because these pens are plastic, and I don't want to scuff them up in my pants pocket where they might make contact with my keys. The one notable exception is the Kaweco Sport Brass, a pen that is at home not only in my pants pocket, but in all sorts of rough and tumble environments that would instantly scratch up my other pens. Not only is this pen an invaluable part of my everyday carry drawing equipment, it taught me a very valuable lesson, that super heavy pens can actually be comfortable to use, so long as they have a comfortable grip section, and most crucially, for a heavy pen, great balance. As much as I love the Kaweco Sport Brass, it does have two small defects: a nib that isn't great, dry and rather stiff, and a grip section that isn't quite perfect, a little bit on the small side. And while the nib issue was a simple fix, solved simply by switching out the nib with a wonderful semi-flex vintage nib, the grip section is just something I've learned to live with. But those two issues have led me to explore what other durable metal pocket pens are out there, and that search led me to the Gravitas Pocket Pen. Gravitas Pens is a small company out of Ireland that has been making tremendous waves in the fountain pen community lately with their unique materials, finishes, and innovative designs, which receive rave reviews. I was instantly struck by the sleek modern design of this pen, but two things really sealed the deal for me. The first was that this pen used a number 6 size nib, which meant there was a huge number of nib options for it. And the second was that while many pocket pens feature miniaturized, uncomfortable grip sections, this one here was adult-sized, having a long, textured hourglass shape that you can just tell would be a pleasure to hold. I was also seduced by the number of materials this pocket pen was offered in, including unusual materials like Ultem, which is an amber-colored, ultra-durable plastic. And I also found the one in copper especially appealing, since my copper Lilliput had acquired such a pretty patina. The price of this pen was on the higher side, €130 altogether, but it had been half a year since I splurged on a pricier pen, and considering the material and the fantastic reviews, this seemed like a very good deal. These pens usually come with number 6 steel Jowo nibs, but since I probably have several dozen pens featuring those nibs, I decided to go with a more unusual option, a semi-flex fine titanium nib. I've been curious about titanium nibs for some time, and given that this upgrade was only an additional €15, this seemed like a great opportunity to pair an exotic pen body with an equally exotic nib. Here is the Gravitas Pocket Pen in the copper finish in all of its glory. The pen measures 4 1/8 of an inch, or about 10.5 centimeters when it's closed. Uncapped, it becomes about 4 inches, or about 10 centimeters. And then when you post it, it expands to 5 1/4 inch, or about 10.5 centimeters. Here's what it looks like closed compared to a Kaweco Sport Brass. Close in size, but a little bit shorter. But when you post the pens, the Gravitas pen becomes about half an inch longer, which is something that will be relevant and I'll discuss later in the review. While this is partially a fountain pen review channel, I tend not to dwell on the aesthetics of the pens I review, since I'm mostly concerned with how well the pen works for making art. But let's stop and give credit where it's due, because this is a very handsome design. I have a number of metal pocket pens, these 3 Kawecos, the Lilliput, the Sport, and the Supra, and this Mini K by Keras Customs, which I believe has been discontinued. And while I like many things about them, they very much look like something at home in an old machine shop, whereas the Gravitas' pleasing curves and proportions make it feel like an elegant modern sculpture. And I love the deep warm glow of copper, which to my mind pairs perfectly with this design. When posted, the contrasting textures of the swooping silver section and the bulging cap is also very nice, looking like no other pen in my collection. The pen feels very well made, with careful attention to detail, creamy smooth threading in the cap and the grip section, and O-rings to ensure a tight seal and to prevent over-tightening. The pen posts very deeply, as a pocket pen that gets its necessary length from posting should. The pen takes short international cartridges and also comes with this dinky little converter which barely holds any ink at all. Sadly, because the pen is made with a highly reactive metal, it cannot be eyedroppered, unlike some of the other pens made by Gravitas that are made from highly resistant plastics. Now let's discuss the ergonomics. As soon as you hold the pen, you are instantly struck by two things: the extreme comfort of the grip section and the pen's tremendous weight. The grip section is one of the best I've seen and should be a model for pen makers everywhere. The hourglass shape conforms to the fingers, the flare limits their distance to the nib, and the length keeps them far away from the threads, which, even if they were closer, are smooth enough not to cause any irritation. The fine knurling is simply perfection, gently biting into the fingers, providing just the perfect amount of grip without feeling rough. On heavy pens like this, having a comfortable grip section is crucial, and is the fatal flaw of the Supra, a pen that I never reach for only because of its short, slippery grip section with sharp threads close to the fingers. Unfortunately, the extreme weight of this pen is problematic. Copper is one of the heaviest metals that are commonly used in making fountain pens, and I did expect this pen to be heavy. But this heavy? No. This pen weighs a whopping 80 grams. Compare this to my next heaviest pen, the Kaweco Brass, which weighs in at only 49. The Kaweco is considerably heavier than most of my pens and took a little getting used to, but now that I've had it a little over a year, I find it comfortable enough because despite the weight, the balance on it is just right. And that's really the key with heavy pens. The balance is crucial, and in the Gravitas, the balance is just not right. The cap of the pen alone weighs 42 grams, and when posted, makes the pen on the long side almost half an inch longer than the Kaweco Sport. And while the chunky Kaweco cap rests comfortably in the thenar space, that area between the thumb and the forefinger, the super chunky cap on the Gravitas sticks out, making the pen back heavy, hindering swift movements often made in drawing. Whether this is a fatal flaw that'll keep me from using this pen remains to be seen. It might just be that this is something that I can get used to. But this pen's weight and balance is such a tremendous outlier that it'll probably require constant use to become accustomed to it. And since I tend to switch pens often, I don't think that's going to happen. Part of me feels bad for criticizing this pen's weight and balance, since this pen comes in quite a few other materials that are considerably lighter, and I chose the copper finish knowing that it's going to be heavy. I can partially justify my kvetching by the fact that the pen's weight is incorrectly listed on their official website as weighing 69 grams, the same as their brass model. So I got 10 grams more copper than I asked for. But it speaks to a larger issue. A pen design that works in a lighter material might not work quite as well in a heavier material, and changing materials usually necessitates a change in design. This particular pen design, which comes in a plastic version that weighs only 13 grams, all the way to the copper version, which again weighs 80, cannot possibly perform equally well at every single weight class. Another, this time minor example of this is the roll stop, which might be perfectly effective in a lighter pen, but doesn't work as well in this heavier version where the small flat surface is insufficient to stop the momentum once it starts its rolling. Of course, redesigning a pen to meet the requirements of each and every material would be fantastically time-consuming and expensive, especially for a small operation like Gravitas. I mention it only as something to be considered when buying a pen that comes in a large variety of different finishes. Besides the weight and balance, there is another issue I'd like to point out. The cap posts metal on metal, which has quickly created a scratch on the back of the pen. I originally thought this problem might be limited to the copper version, which is a softer metal, but after looking at a few reviews, see that it's the case on all other metal pens. This is a very minor thing that shouldn't bother me, but as much as I resisted being bothered, I'm bothered by it, and I'll explain why. In my other metal pens, such as this Coeco brass, the scuffing and scratching adds character, like battle scars, since they already look like old tools. But this pen is so sleek and modern that my impulse is to avoid getting scratches on it, and I find myself suffering every time I see another scuff. But now let's talk about the most important aspect of a pen, the nib. These pens usually come with a number 6 Jova feed and nib, which is great since these nibs are perfect for dry writing and with a touch of line variation. And since Jova and Jova compatible nibs are very common, there's a huge variety of options to choose from. Furthermore, since the feed pulls right out, switching nibs is very easy and makes everything easy to clean. As mentioned, I chose the titanium fine flex option, which is only €15 more than the regular nib. This seemed like a good deal because usually titanium nibs come at a steeper premium, adding at least an additional $50 to a pen. And this one came with a proprietary polymer feed meant to keep up with the greater demands of a flexible nib. Titanium nibs are still a fairly recent and exotic entrant to the market, with Bock the only major manufacturer to make them. With limited ability for comparison, there doesn't seem to be any consensus about how this metal performs versus its steel and gold counterparts. The nibs made by Bock are slightly more flexible than their steel ones, have slightly more generous flow, and have slightly more feedback. Whether this relates to the nature of titanium or is simply a consequence of their design is anyone's guess at this point. This particular nib is very similar in appearance to the steel flex nibs coming out of India, which are some of my favorite for drawing due to their flexibility, springiness, and of course affordability. However, they usually require a well-tuned feed with a generous ink flow, and don't work well in every pen. Let's take this nib through my series of patented tests and see how it performs. To keep these tests uniform, I'm using Windsor and Newton Bristol paper, which is a very commonly used paper for pen and ink drawings, and filling my pens with Noodler's Lexington Gray, which, because of its transparency, gives you a better idea of the pen's wetness. In the consistency test, the pen performed very well, delivering a fine, unbroken line at every angle and speed. This is something that Indian flex nibs sometimes have problems with, so it's good to see that this nib performs so well in this category. In the line variation test, this nib also performed very well, being not quite as flexible as the similarly shaped number 6 Ultraflex nib from Fountain Pen Revolution, but close. The great thing is that the feed does a good job keeping up with the demand of the nib, something that is not always the case with modern flex nibs. In reverse writing, it does put down a faint line, probably too thin and dry to be of any use. And in the flex nib, the pen burped out a bunch of ink. This unfortunately is not an anomaly. This pen will burp on occasion, especially after it's been flexed. This is a major issue and why flex pens are so difficult to produce. The flow in a flex pen has to be quite generous, but if it's too generous, the pen will drip. Here the feed has been given too much flow, and the result is that the pen will drip on occasion. In the feedback test, the pen showed itself to be a smooth writer with a pleasant amount of feedback. However, it did splatter a touch when I did some extreme scribbling. I hesitate to speculate what is causing the problem here, since I'm no expert on ink mechanics, but the design of this feed is unusual in that it has shallow grooves instead of fins next to the ink channel, and I suspect that they become saturated with ink when the pen is flexed, resulting in some splattering. In the flow and wetness test, we see the unfortunate results of an overactive feed, lines that are very wet in normal writing and ridiculously wet when flexed. This is not a deal breaker necessarily. Many flex pens write very wet, and it's just a matter of learning how to deal with them. And I'd much rather have a pen that's wet, but doesn't quit on me and starts railroading in the middle of a flex line. We'll see how much that burping issue presents a problem when we do the last and most important test, actually drawing with this pen. Let's start the drawing. I'm continuing to use Noodler's Lexington Gray here, but have switched over to working on multimedia paper in my Talens Art Creations Sketchbook. As I mentioned, the nib performs very well, gliding smoothly and responsibly over the paper, and is stiff enough that it can be used comfortably without flexing, putting down a semi-wet extra fine line. However, issues arise when you flex the pen, with the line becoming extremely wet, so wet that when you use the pen fast, it spatters ink. I originally thought this might be due to a misalignment between the nib and the feed, which can happen in pens that lack a housing unit. After running my usual tests, I tried realigning the nib and got slightly better results, but not significantly so. Though, for some reason, the reverse writing improved and I was able to implement it for finer lines in my drawing. After trying to align the nib several times, the pen continued to be very wet. Again, this is not such a big problem. What is, however, is that because of the wetness of the feed, if the pen is stored upside down, or even just on its side, ink will drip into the cap, resulting in an inky mess every time you open the pen. For a pocket pen, this is less than ideal. Besides the polymer feed, the pen also came with a regular JoWo feed, and I figured I would try this nib with it, but it wouldn't fit. This is not surprising, since many of these kinds of nibs do not fit into JoWo-compatible pens, even though they are the same number 6 size. I was able to use that feed with a regular extra fine number 6 JoWo nib, and the pen performed perfectly with it and will probably be what I use with this pen going forward. Here is a drawing that I did with a pen using that fine JoWo nib. The drip at the edge was from the pen with the titanium nib installed. This is unfortunate since the flex on the titanium nib is quite nice, and it has potential to be a great drawing tool if paired with a well-functioning feed that doesn't turn into a hose when you flex the pen. As for the weight and balance of the pen, I can't say it hindered my drawing motion or compromised my drawing performance, but after 30 minutes of continuous drawing, I did feel my hands start to fatigue. My drawing stamina is usually pretty good since I draw every day and I'm able to work for several hours at a time without strain. So this was an indication that the weight was indeed an issue. Again, perhaps this is something that one can get used to, but I really can't imagine working with this pen for very long periods of time. This pen is for quick sketches only. In retrospect, I think that buying this pen in the copper finish was a silly mistake, which even if it was 69 grams instead of 80, would still probably be too heavy to use comfortably. If I had to do it over, I would have purchased the titanium version, which costs the same, is half the weight, and is much more durable than copper. The price of these pens is not prohibitive, and I see the potential of this design to be great, but I'm sad to report I don't think I'll be making another purchase from Gravitas. When I bought the pen, it was listed as in stock and ready to ship within 5 to 7 business days. After 3 weeks, the order was still listed on the website as unfulfilled. After 5 weeks, I sent a note through the website asking about my order and received no reply. A week later, I sent another email and received no reply. A week after that, I sent yet another email, this time directly to the owner, and received, again, no reply. With the order showing as unfulfilled after 2 months, I was about to request a refund from PayPal when the pen suddenly arrived. A week later, I received an email that my pen had shipped. I hesitate to say negative things about a small business, but a quick check of the pen forums revealed that my experience was not isolated and that quite a few people were disgruntled with Gravitas' poor customer service. I understand this is a one-man operation, and given the company's popularity on social media, the owner is probably swamped with orders. I'm also perfectly willing to wait 2 months for a pen, and do so all the time when ordering pens from China. But it doesn't take all that much effort to simply say that you're experiencing shipping delays and that it'll take 2 months to get your pen. This will save your customers stress and frustration, especially those that are purchasing these pens as gifts and need them to arrive at a certain time. Furthermore, I was thinking of contacting the company regarding my issue with the drippy nib, but considering the complete lack of response, even with a small shipping delay, I don't think I'm going to bother. So, to conclude, this is a very handsome, original-looking pen with some fantastic ideas. I can't stop saying good things about its grip section and its visually pleasing proportions. However, this pen also has some deep flaws, metal-on-metal posting that immediately scratches the pen, and, at least on the much heavier copper version, less than ideal weight and balance. I would also stay away from the titanium flex nib, since the polymer feed it comes with makes it write way too wet. However, Gravitas is a young, innovative company that is constantly refining their designs and coming up with new ones. So I'm going to continue following it with great interest and hoping that they resolve their customer service issues. I hope you found this review useful, and if you did and haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.